One driver in the modern Formula One era has stood out more than the others, and I don't mean by driving, but I mean by personality. And the guy that I'm talking about is Daniel Ricciardo. And while his personality shined completely in Formula One, his performance also shined throughout his whole entire career. This video is more focused on how great of a driver Daniel Ricciardo genuinely was in his Formula One career. While his career might not be over just yet, he is currently out of F1, and I want to talk about how successful he was while he was in F1. Obviously, if people have only really kept up with Formula One in 2021 and 2022, you wouldn't really know the type of driver that Daniel Ricciardo is. Sure, he's had some standout performances. I guess we can talk about 2022 Mexico was a great performance by Daniel. I really wouldn't put much more. Maybe Monza was a really good performance for Daniel. Anytime he was near the top, he could kind of perform in that car. But 2022 was definitely Daniel Ricciardo's weakest year. From a driver that started from a team called HRC, which was complete garbage, to moving up to all the way to Red Bull, moving to Renault, and moving to McLaren. And having, I would say, successful moments in every single team that he was in. When he started his career, HRC was a team that was so far back on the grid, it wasn't possible for them to make points. But he did stand out enough for the Red Bull Academy to pick him up and put him in a Toro Rosso, which propelled his career. He went from Toro Rosso, performed really well in a car, scored in the first 5 races 4 times in a car that was competitive in the midfield. It fell back due to upgrades, but he was extremely competitive in that Toro Rosso. This is where we started hearing more about the HoneyBadger himself. And from 2010 to 2014, these were Daniel Ricciardo's learning years, as I would say. He goes in to a car put up against a 4-time world champion. Might I add, he just won 4 in a row. His name is Sebastian Vettel. He had no chance. That was many of the rumors in that year. There was no chance for Daniel Ricciardo to actually perform against this real GOAT driver of that era of cars. Well, guess what he did in that first season? He beat Sebastian Vettel and went on to have, in 2014, his best season, 3 wins in total in the season. There's one big thing I want you to know about Daniel Ricciardo in his career. He has 8 wins, and he has never, and I mean never, ever, ever, had the fastest car on the grid. He has had fast cars, but never the fastest car on the grid. And that is a big thing to know because it's very hard to win with a car that's not the quickest on the grid. And he had 3 poles in his career. He only won 1 from pole. Every other one, he won from further back on the grid. Now, let's talk about 2014. 2014 is the first year he's put into a car that could compete at the top. And up until the last maybe 2 or 3 races in the season, he was up for winning the championship. Yes, Daniel Ricciardo was, not Sebastian Vettel. But in 2014, as we know, those Mercedes cars were way too quick for the rest of the field. It wasn't as competitive as it needed to be. The Red Bull fell back from 2013 to 2014 due to the regulation change. They didn't really quite nail it on the coffin, so he wasn't able to compete. But he did finish 3rd, which is insanity to think that his first year in Red Bull, he does something insane like that and performs in that Red Bull car. Now, as years go by, Daniel Ricciardo keeps himself in that Red Bull from 2014 all the way up until 2018. And he excels every single year, going on to verse a guy that we all know as Max Verstappen. What does he do? He beats him in 2 out of the 3 years. He is super competitive, and yes, we can go off of, oh, but Max was young, Max was making many mistakes. Hey, guess who was young when he went against Sebastian Vettel? Daniel Ricciardo. And he performed right away. Max was extremely close to Daniel every single year that they versed. You could arguably give the point that Max was the faster driver. In true raw pace, I guess you could say. But Daniel Ricciardo came and performed. He was right neck and neck with him. And now, as you can tell, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, and Sergio Perez have shown that it is impossible to match with Max Verstappen. Hey, only one guy did it. And I could argue that for these past 3 years that Daniel's not been here, 4 actually, For the past 4 years that he's not been in that Red Bull car, hey, I can argue he would have been the closest out of all those guys by far to Max Verstappen. Regardless, whether it's the 2022 chassis, 21, 20, 2019, it don't matter. Ricciardo would have been the closer out of Gasly, Albon, and Perez. But that's not saying much. He's a great driver. While I think they're all good drivers, Daniel Ricciardo is a great driver. He is an 8-time winner, winning the 3 times that I told you about in 2014, competing with Sebastian Vettel, beating him in the championship standings, beating him in multiple races, doing moves like what he did in Monza. I mean, just like watch this, dude. It's just the fake dummy. I don't even know how to explain it. It's a beaut, man. This guy was so fluid with the car that he could brake late with. Now, as the years go by, and he's in Red Bull, he's competing with Max. He's showing him the pace, super late braking, getting the most out of the points, competing as best as possible. The stats that I have up right now in the video just shows where this guy was putting a car that was always either 3rd or 4th place, might I add. Typically 3rd, that really could not compete for actual wins themselves, only under crazy circumstances. He had performances like China. He had performances like Monaco. He has these undeniable performances that could never be forgotten. He got that pole in that 2018 Mexico car that shouldn't have been getting pole. Should have probably finished either 1 or 2 if it wasn't for the car actually DNFing that race. 2018 was a year of misfortune for Daniel Ricciardo. He went on to have a record-breaking 8 DNFs. 8 DNFs is ridiculous. And yet he was still close to competing with Max Verstappen that year. That was the only year that Max Verstappen beat Daniel Ricciardo. That's a pretty big deal, dude. That's a pretty big deal that it was that competitive and that close, and that's what Daniel Ricciardo's talent was. Let's not remember the guy that got put into a car that completely did not suit his style. It would be like putting Lewis Hamilton in a car that's completely opposite of his style. How do you think Lewis would perform? Sure, he could maybe adapt to the car, but he would never be at his fullest potential. And we saw a 2021 Daniel Ricciardo in a car that he was completely out of touch with win a race. He won a race with a car that probably shouldn't have won a race. It was also the 4th quickest car on the grid. Probably the Ferrari, the Red Bull, and the Mercedes being a lot quicker than that. Yet again, he still performed. But let's ignore 2021 and 2022. Like I said, we talked about 2014. Let's talk about 2018. Another big year because of the DNFs that I talked to you about and 2 wins that he had in that year. He outperformed himself. He was extremely competitive. Really showed his potential against Max and really the whole rest of the grid with performances like China and with performances like Monaco. Now that Monaco performance will be remembered for ages because guess what? He lost a complete gear and was stuck being in 6th gear the whole entire race after the first pit stop. He pit stopped, it was lap 27. From lap 27 to 71, he was competitive. Competitive meaning he didn't have a gear to go off of. He couldn't go full speed, and Sebastian Vettel was on his tail the whole time. He defended perfectly, made Vettel screw up his tires, and won the race due to complete consistency and nailing every single spot that he needed to nail, and being the HoneyBadger that we all love and know. This was a year that he decided to move from Red Bull to Renault, which to me, at the time, was a questionable one, but I could see why it was coming. He felt a threat with Red Bull, so he made a move that was comfortable for himself. 2019 was not the year that we actually knew of Daniel Ricciardo. He starts the year off crashing in Australia in a really dumb way because he didn't do the track walk, which to me I find pretty hilarious. Like, that's what those track walks are for you to remember it in the moment when you're driving. Hey, he used it as an excuse, so I mean, I guess it does mean something. But what I'm trying to tell you is 2019 was yet again a year of adapting to a car that the team actually tried performing as best as possible towards Daniel Ricciardo's style. And what do we get? We get the 2020 Daniel Ricciardo that I think, except 2014, those are extremely close. 2014 and 2020 are prime Daniel Ricciardo years, and this is why I think this man is great. He goes on to get 2 podiums. One in Imola, one in Paris. He was a killer this year. He was late braking. He was 5th in the championship in a Renault that didn't even finish 5th in the championship. They did finish 5th in the championship. Renault finished 5th in the championship. He finished 5th in the championship standings drivers. That's insane. Ocon was nowhere close to his performance. Ocon, who was actually pretty close to Fernando Alonso this year in performance. It tells you the skill level that Ricciardo genuinely has. By the way, Ocon has worked with multiple teams before. You could give the argument that was his first year in that car, but he was getting smoked, man. Daniel Ricciardo in his first year in the car beat Nico, who was in that team for a couple of years. Now, while I don't want to talk about 2019 that much because I don't think it was a great year, 2020 was outstanding, and I will use Ocon as a performance. He is versed in his career. These are the opponents, more like teammates that he's had to compete against his whole entire career. He has versed people like Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen, Esteban Ocon, and Lando Norris. Now these 4 alone could probably take out, you put a Max and Vettel, they'll probably take out 95% of the grid, with the exception of a couple of drivers on there. Max Verstappen just won a championship twice in a row. Vettel has won 4 championships. Lando Norris is a potential winner in championships. He has competed greatly against all of them, with the exception of Lando, because of those moments that he's had in 2021 and 2022. What I really wanted to mention was that this guy could just do it all. He was the driver complete in both qualifying and the race, but specifically in how he could perform in these cars that had a strong front end and he could really perform in the brakes. He showed off why he is, in one of my opinions, one of the most wasted talents that we've had in Formula One. He could have definitely been up there with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen if given the right car. If really given that spotlight to shine in a team that was of his own. Now, does Daniel Ricciardo have a chance of coming back into Formula One? I think he does. With the recent rumors of Cadillac and Andretti joining the team, joining the grid, I know they want an American driver, and I think Colin Herta is going to definitely be the guy. But a second driver? Who wouldn't want a Daniel Ricciardo to be stepping up into that team? I think that would be a killer combo to have Ricciardo and Herta in a team. Would he want to join a team that's not near the top? It's possible he wouldn't, but it is also very possible that he could be one of those guys that kind of ranks that team up and stays with that team, maybe makes something out of it. It's possible. Would I love for him to join Red Bull? That is what I predicted in one of my videos way earlier on, that he will join back Red Bull. But I love Daniel Ricciardo, and I really hope that all the people watching this love him because he has had an amazing career. And I really hope we see him back on the grid, but as well appreciate what he has done for the sport. And in ages, remember him as one of those drivers that is kind of unforgettable. The late braking, dive bombing beast that Daniel Ricciardo was, the HoneyBadger himself. Let's remember it. Hope you guys liked the video. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.